Just 3 days after I buried my daughter, my only child, Sarah, my son-in-law Kevin threw my bags onto the wet lawn. He screamed, "You're a useless old man, Frank. Go live with the beggars." I begged him to reconsider for my granddaughter's sake, for the memory of my late wife, but he just laughed and locked the gate. The next day, a certified envelope arrived at that house. When he opened it, he realized the $2 million mistake he had just made. He had kicked out his golden goose, and he would realize it far, far too late. Before I continue this story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you believe that respect is earned, not inherited. The November rain over the Denver suburbs had a particular kind of cold. The kind that doesn't just chill your skin, it finds the old aches in your bones and reminds them of their history. I stood there on the grass. I had seated myself 2 springs ago and watched the last of my life hit the muddy ground with a soft final thud. A worn leather travel bag, a gift from Sarah for my 60th birthday, landed with its zipper half open, spilling a few shirts onto the lawn. They were immediately soaked. My son-in-law, Kevin Holt, stood on the porch framed by the warm yellow light of the house. My house. His face was flushed, a mixture of anger and a kind of triumphant righteousness. At 40 years old, he had the polished look of a man who worked in finance, but the petulant cruelty of a boy who had never been told no. "Did you hear me?" he shouted, his voice cutting through the steady drizzle. "It's over. This house, everything, it belongs to me and Lily now. We need to be secure. You're a liability." I put a hand to my chest, a reflex I'd developed since the heart surgery 6 months ago. The scar beneath my shirt felt tight. "Kevin, please," I said, my voice sounding weaker than I wanted. "Let's just talk about this. Sarah wouldn't have wanted—" "Don't you dare bring her into this," he snapped. He took a step forward, jabbing a finger in my direction. "She's the reason I put up with you for so long. Now she's gone. This is my house, my rules." I glanced toward the living room window. Through the rain-streaked glass, I could see my 9-year-old granddaughter, Lily, her small face pressed against the pane, tears tracing paths down her cheeks. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second, before Kevin stepped in front of the window, blocking her from my view. That single action felt more violent than any shout. The memory hit me then, sharp and unwelcome. Sarah in that sterile hospital bed, her hand frail in mine. Her voice was a whisper thin as thread. "Promise me you'll look after them, Frank. Kevin, he's ambitious. Lily needs you. Promise me." And I had. I had promised. I promised her I would take care of you. I said the words tasting like ash. Kevin let out a short, barking laugh. "And you have. You've given us the house. Your work is done. Now get off my property before I call the police." He turned, walked back inside, and shut the door with a solid, definitive click. Then the deadbolt slid home. I stood there for a long time, the rain plastering my thin hair to my scalp, the cold seeping through my jacket. I didn't look at the scattered clothes or the overturned bunk. My gaze was fixed on that locked door. The pain was immense, a physical weight in my chest, but underneath it something else was stirring. A strange, cold calm. It was the engineer in me waking up, the part of my mind that doesn't feel panic, but instead sees a problem that needs to be solved. A system that has failed and requires correction. They thought they were watching a victim walk away. They had no idea they were watching a strategist retreat to draw up a new set of plans. The house was just the first move on a board they didn't even know we were playing on. And my turn was coming. I didn't pick up the scattered shirts. I left them there in the mud as a quiet testament to the evening's ugliness. I only bent down to retrieve one thing, the sturdy canvas satchel that held my old laptop, a thick folder of personal documents, and the small framed photo of Sarah I kept on my nightstand. It was all I needed. As I walked down the curved driveway, the gravel crunching under my worn shoes, I didn't look back. The rain was steady, washing the world into shades of gray, but in my mind, the path forward was becoming starkly clear. There is a specific kind of freedom that comes after you've lost what you thought you couldn't live without. Your pride goes first, then your illusions. What's left is the hard, cold ground of what is real, and from there you can build anything. Kevin thought the story was about him inheriting a house. He was wrong. The story was about what he had just thrown away. He saw a useless old man, a relic to be discarded. He had no idea he was looking at the architect of a fortune he was already counting as his own. He didn't know that the foundation of his entire comfortable life wasn't the house he had just claimed, but the mind of the man he had just banished into the rain. That was a mistake that would cost him everything. The cold silence in my car was a relief after the shouting. I drove not toward a shelter or a friend's house, but to a place I had researched weeks ago, a quiet, anonymous, extended-stay hotel on the far side of the city. A place for men in suits traveling on expense accounts. A place where no one asks questions as long as the credit card clears. And mine still did. For now. The drive away from my home was a blur of slick asphalt and the steady rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers. I didn't notice the familiar landmarks. I didn't see the turnoff for the park where Sarah and I used to walk. My mind was a quiet, cold engine processing the events of the last hour, not as a tragedy, but as a set of variables in a new complex equation. Grief could wait. Shock had already been filed away. What remained was the problem itself, clean and sharp, and waiting for a solution. I didn't drive to a friend's house. Pity is a poor foundation for a counter-offensive. I didn't seek out a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind of place that smells of desperation and disinfectant. Instead, I drove to the DTC, the Denver Tech Center, a sterile landscape of glass buildings and corporate hotels. I chose the residence suites, a place built for consultants and mid-level managers on temporary assignment. A place of perfect functional anonymity. The young woman at the front desk had a practiced smile. She asked for a credit card and ID without looking up for more than a second. I was just another guest, another transaction. To her, I was a man in a damp coat who needed a room for a week, maybe more. I paid for the first 7 nights in advance. "Will you be needing anything else, Mr. Miller?" she asked, her tone already moving on to the next task. "Just quiet," I said. The room was on the 3rd floor overlooking a parking lot. It was clean, beige, and utterly devoid of personality. A small kitchenette with a microwave and a coffee maker I knew would produce something bitter. A desk that had seen 1,000 laptops just like mine. A bed with a generic print hanging above it, a picture of aspens in the fall that could have been taken anywhere. It was perfect. It was a blank slate. I set my canvas satchel on the desk. I didn't unpack my clothes. I unpacked my arsenal. First, the laptop. I plugged it in and watched the screen flicker to life. Then the thick folder of documents. I laid them out in neat stacks on the desk, the deed to the house solely in my name. Bank statements. The original patent filings for the reinforcement matrix. Tax records. Each piece of paper was a brick in the wall I was about to build. I took the small framed photo of Sarah and set it on the corner of the desk facing me. She was smiling an honest smile from a day at the lake years ago. "Well, Sarah," I whispered to the quiet room, I promised I'd take care of them. I just never realized what that would look like. Finally, I went to the kitchenette. I found the packet of instant coffee, poured it into one of the thick ceramic mugs, and added hot water from the tap. It tasted exactly as I expected, functional, without a hint of pleasure. I carried it back to the desk, my command center, and sat down. My hands, which had trembled in the rain, were now perfectly still. My mind was a blueprint, clear and precise. There was no panic here. There was no rage. There was only the methodical calm of an engineer who has been given a complex problem, all the necessary materials, and a deadline. and the work was about to begin. I let the coffee go cold. Fuel was one thing, but comfort was a luxury I hadn't earned yet. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a name I hadn't dialed in over a year, David Chen. David and I went back 30 years. We'd met when I was bidding on a complex municipal contract, and he was the young, hungry lawyer who found a loophole in the city code that saved me a fortune. He wasn't a man you called to share good news. He was a man you called when you needed a wall built out of paper and ink, and you needed it built yesterday. He answered on the second ring, his voice the same as it had always been, a calm, low baritone that had never once been raised in all the years I'd known him. "Frank," he said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. "David, I have a situation." There was a pause, the sound of a pen being set down on a heavy wooden desk. "Family or business?" he asked. "Both," I said. I took a breath and laid it out for him clinically, without emotion. I recounted the events on the porch, the words Kevin had used, the locked gate, my daughter's crying face in the window. I told him I was in a hotel room in the tech center. I didn't editorialize. I didn't complain. I just gave him the facts, the raw materials of the problem. He was silent for a long moment when I finished. He didn't offer condolences or outrage. David knew that sympathy was a currency with no value in a courtroom. "He's the sole occupant of the house now?" he finally asked. "As far as I know, and the deed is still exclusively in your name, no trusts, no co-ownership clauses with Sarah that could be misinterpreted." "Sole owner," I confirmed. "Clean title." "Good," he said. The word was a single, solid brick being laid in place. "What's our objective, Frank? Do you want him out, or do you want him to learn a lesson?" "I want both," I said, "but one is more important than the other. I want him to understand that actions have consequences he can't talk his way out of." "All right," David said. "I have 2 instructions for you. I need you to follow them precisely." He listened. The silence on his end was active, attentive. "First, I want you to start the formal eviction process. But I want it done by the book, and I want it done slowly. Send the first official warning letter tomorrow. Use the most formal language the law allows. I want him to see it, to think I'm starting a long, predictable legal battle. I want him to get comfortable." David made a sound of comprehension. "The red herring. You want him looking at his left hand?" "Exactly," I said. "Because my right hand is what matters." Which brings me to the main event. I could almost feel the shift in the air over the phone line. "I need you to contact Innovent Technologies first thing in the morning. My contract for the composite matrix patent has a security clause, Section 7C. It's for situations where the patent holder's personal security or residence is compromised." "I remember it," David said. "We wrote it in after that industrial espionage scare in 2008. I want you to invoke it. Inform their legal department that my primary residence has been forcibly occupied and my personal security is under review. As per the clause, I am requesting an immediate and total security hold on all royalty payments associated with patent number 7B4881. All financial disbursements, all correspondence. Everything is to be suspended and redirected to your office effective immediately." "Nothing moves, David. Not a dime, not an email without my direct in-person authorization at your office." The silence that followed was different. It was the sound of a very smart man appreciating a well-designed machine, Frank David said, and for the first time there was a hint of something other than business in his voice. It sounded like respect. "The engineer is back at the drafting table." "He never left," I said. "He was just dormant." "Consider it done," David said, all business again. "I'll have a courier deliver the notice to Innovent's headquarters by 9 a.m. I'll draft the eviction warning for Kevin. You stay put. And Frank, yes. Don't answer his calls when he finally realizes what you've done. Let him talk to me." That was always the plan, I said, and for the first time since I'd watched my life get thrown onto the lawn, I felt the corner of my mouth lift into something that resembled a smile. The pieces were in motion. The trap was being set. And my son-in-law was about to learn that the most dangerous man isn't the one who shouts. It's the one who sits quietly with a blueprint. I didn't have to be in the house to see what was happening. I had spent a lifetime studying the predictable physics of arrogance and greed. So as I sat in the sterile quiet of my hotel room, I could picture it all with perfect, painful clarity. I saw Kevin striding through the living room, my living room, with the swagger of a conqueror. He would have poured himself a glass of my best scotch, the 18-year-old single malt I saved for special occasions, and dropped into my worn leather armchair. He'd put his feet up on the ottoman that Sarah had painstakingly knitted, the one she'd always scolded me for resting my shoes on. In my mind's eye, I saw him on the phone, his voice slick with false modesty. "Yeah, man, it's done," he'd be saying to one of his slick friends. The old man finally saw reason. No, he just walked off. A little dramatic, but what can you do? The place is mine now, a clean slate for me and Lily. He would believe every word. For him, possession was the only law that mattered. Then I pictured his frustration, a minor inconvenience in his grand victory. He'd sit down at my desk, open my laptop, and try to access my financial accounts. He'd be looking for the inheritance he believed was his birthright. The screen would flash, "Access denied." He would try again. "Password incorrect." A flicker of annoyance would cross his face, but not alarm. He would close the laptop with a dismissive snap, thinking it was just a petty final act of a bitter old man. He changed the passwords, he'd mutter to himself. "Doesn't matter. We'll sort it out Monday." He would see my actions as small, emotional, and ultimately powerless. He wouldn't see the steel gears of the real machine beginning to turn. The next day, David's eviction letter would arrive. A formal cream-colored envelope delivered by the mail carrier. I could see Kevin retrieving it from the mailbox, maybe with a smirk. He would tear it open, his eyes scanning the dense legalese. He wouldn't feel fear. He'd feel contempt. He'd laugh, a loud, dismissive sound that would echo in the entryway where Sarah used to hang Lily's crayon drawings. He'd probably call that same friend back. "You won't believe this," he'd say, the laughter still in his voice. "The old man hired a lawyer, sent me a letter full of cease and desists and unlawful occupations. He's actually going to try and fight me. This is going to be fun." He wouldn't see the letter for what it was, a piece of theatrical misdirection. A bright, noisy object for him to focus on while the real trap was being set in silence. Bolstered by this false sense of superiority, he would feel untouchable. He would start making plans. I could see him at the kitchen island, the one Sarah and I designed together, sketching out his future on a napkin or a tablet. A new car, probably a German sports sedan he couldn't afford. A vacation to some island with white sand and blue water, a place to reward himself for his brilliant strategy. He would be calculating how to leverage the value of the house, how to liquidate the assets he believed were just sitting there waiting for him. He was a man standing on a trap door, admiring the view and drawing up blueprints for a castle. The phone on my hotel desk vibrated, pulling me from my simulation. The screen lit up with David's name. I answered. "Frank, it's done." David's voice was calm, a simple statement of a task completed. "Innovant." I asked, my own voice steady. Their legal counsel confirmed receipt of the notice via courier. The security hold on patent 7B4881 is in place, effective immediately. They're drafting a formal letter to the house on Blue Heron Lane as we speak, informing the current occupant of the payment suspension. Not a penny will move until you walk into my office and sign a release form. I closed my eyes. The image in my head was so clear. Kevin sitting at my table, celebrating his victory, while a certified letter was already making its way across the city. A letter that would inform him that the $2 million a year golden goose he thought he had captured had in fact just flown away. And the eviction letter, I asked. "In the mail." "He'll get it tomorrow morning," David said. He'll be looking at the wrong threat. The payments are frozen, Frank. The trap is sprung. Now we wait for the animal to realize it's caught. I thanked him and ended the call. I looked at the picture of Sarah on my desk. Her smile seemed to understand everything. The quiet in the room was no longer empty. It was patient. It was waiting. The days in the hotel room began to blend into a single continuous hum of quiet purpose. The world outside my window moved on its own schedule. Businessmen left early, their rolling suitcases clicking on the pavement. Housekeeping carts appeared in the hallways at precisely 10 a.m. Life continued oblivious to the small contained war I was waging from my temporary command center on the 3rd floor. I spent my time refining the details, cross-referencing my documents, and running simulations in my head, anticipating Kevin's next move. I was an engineer again, checking every load-bearing point before the first ounce of pressure was applied. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. The caller ID showed a local number I recognized instantly. Maria Rodriguez. She and Sarah had been friends for 20 years, the kind of friends who don't need appointments, who show up with soup when you have the flu, and a bottle of wine when your heart is broken. "Frank, it's Maria," she said, her voice a hushed, worried whisper. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I had to call. Are you all right?" "I'm safe, Maria. Thank you for asking." "Safe is one thing, Frank. Okay is another." She took a breath, and I could hear the rustle of a curtain, as if she were speaking from her own kitchen window, looking across the lawn at my house. "He had a locksmith over yesterday. I saw the van. He changed all the locks on the doors." I closed my eyes. It was a predictable move, an assertion of ownership. "I expected as much," I said, keeping my voice even. "That's not all," she continued. "This morning, a man in a polo shirt with a clipboard was walking around the yard. A contractor. Kevin was with him, pointing at the kitchen, talking about opening up the space and improving the sightlines to the lake. Frank, he's acting like he's about to gut the place." I felt a flash of heat in my chest at the thought of Kevin tearing down the walls Sarah and I had painted, the cabinets we had chosen together. But I pushed it down. Emotion was a luxury. "And what is he telling people?" I asked. Maria sighed. The sound was heavy with a sorrow that wasn't hers to carry, but she carried it anyway, out of loyalty to my wife. "He told Bill Henderson from across the street that you decided it was time to move into a lovely retirement community on the south side. He said you were tired of the upkeep and wanted an easier life. He made it sound like it was your idea, Frank. Like you were happy about it." There it was. The careful construction of a false narrative. He wasn't just taking my house. He was erasing my agency, painting me as a feeble old man who couldn't be trusted with his own decisions. "Maria," I said, "thank you for telling me. Just be my eyes for now. Please don't put yourself in the middle of this." "It's too late for that," she said, her voice dropping even lower. "Frank, there's something else. Something Sarah told me before she passed." She hesitated, and I knew she was about to cross a line from neighborly concern into the sacred territory of a friend's confidence. She was worried. Worried sick about Kevin's finances. He lost a lot of money, Frank. A fortune. Some high-risk tech investment that went bust. She told me they were deep in debt, that the credit card bills were astronomical. She was afraid he was going to do something desperate. The final piece of the puzzle slid into place. This wasn't just about entitlement. It was about desperation. Kevin wasn't just a vulture circling a potential meal. He was a starving animal, cornered and reckless. His cruelty wasn't a casual sport. It was a calculated necessity, the only move he thought he had left to save himself. That knowledge didn't soften me. It hardened me further. It meant he was more dangerous, more unpredictable, and it meant my plan had to be flawless. "He is doing something desperate," I said quietly. "Thank you for your courage, Maria. You've honored Sarah's memory today." When we hung up, I walked to the window and looked out at the anonymous landscape of the tech center. Kevin thought he was a predator closing in on an easy target. He had no idea he was the one being hunted. He was drowning in debt, and he thought my house, my assets were his life raft. He didn't know that the letter from Innovent Technologies was already in a courier's hands, a single sheet of paper that would not just take away the life raft, but reveal that the water he was treading was 1,000 feet deep. He thought he needed money. He was about to find out how much the truth would cost him. I knew the FedEx truck would arrive around 10:30 in the morning. I knew the driver was a man named George, who always took his coffee black and liked to complain about the local sports team. These were the small, predictable patterns of the world I had once inhabited. From the beige silence of my hotel room, I pictured the truck making its turn onto Blue Heron Lane, its familiar rumble a mundane announcement of a life-altering event. In my mind, Kevin would be in the kitchen, probably making a smoothie with Sarah's expensive blender, feeling thoroughly pleased with himself. The eviction notice from David would have arrived the day before a minor annoyance he'd already dismissed. He would see the truck pull up, see George walking to the door with a certified overnight envelope, and his first thought would be one of mild irritation. More paperwork from the old man's slow-moving lawyer. He would open the door with a confident, slightly put-upon air. "Yeah, I'll sign for it," he'd say, scribbling his name on the digital scanner with a careless flourish. He would see the return address, Innovent Technologies, and it would mean nothing to him. He'd probably assume it was related to some old stock certificate or a piece of junk mail. The addressee line would give him a brief pause. "Office of Patent Management Attention, Mr. Frank Miller." But his arrogance would smooth over any flicker of concern. He was the man of the house now. All mail was his to open. He would take the envelope to the kitchen island, maybe set it down next to his smoothie. He would tear it open, not with a letter opener, but with a rough tear of his thumb, the way people open bills they don't intend to respect. And then he would see the letterhead. Thick, creamy paper, the Innovent logo embossed in a deep corporate blue. It would feel important in his hands, and that would be the first hint of trouble. His eyes would scan the opening lines. "RE, urgent security, hold on royalty payments, patent." He would frown the words, not quite connecting. Royalty payments, patent. He thought my money was old money savings from my engineering career investments Sarah had managed. He never once considered that I was still an earner, that a piece of my mind was out in the world, working quietly and generating a fortune. Then his eyes would find the numbers. The letter would be brutally clear, written in the cold, unambiguous language of corporate law. This letter serves as formal notification that per the security protocol outlined in Section 7C of your licensing agreement, all royalty disbursements for the above-referenced patent have been suspended effective immediately. This action was triggered by a formal notarized request from your legal counsel, Mr. David Chen, citing a compromise of your primary residence and a significant threat to your personal and financial security. I could picture his breath catching. The smirk would be gone, replaced by a focused confusion. He would read on. "The pending quarterly payment of $850,000 US and all future payments will be held in escrow by Innovent Technologies until the security threat is resolved." That is the moment the floor would disappear from under him. $850,000, not my total worth. A quarterly payment. The sheer scale of it would have staggered him. The smoothie in its expensive glass would be forgotten. The plans for the new kitchen, the new car, the tropical vacation, all of it would evaporate. And then would come the final devastating sentence. The one David and I knew would be the kill shot. All further correspondence regarding the status of this patent and the release of these funds must be directed to the patent holder's new address of record. The law offices of David Chen, 1700 Market Street, Denver. No action can be taken and no funds can be released without the direct, in-person, and legally witnessed authorization of the patent holder, Mr. Frank Miller. I imagined the letter slipping from his fingers, drifting down to the granite countertop. The silence in the kitchen would be absolute. He would look around at the house, at the comfortable furniture, the high-end appliances, and see it all for what it now was: a cage. A beautiful, expensive cage he was trapped in, with no money to pay for its upkeep. He had kicked me out to get to my money, and in doing so had locked the vault and thrown away the key. The only person on earth who could open it was the useless old man he had banished into the rain. That would be the moment the trapdoor gave way. The moment he realized the floor he was standing on was made of paper. My paper. He would have read the letter a second time. Not to understand the words better, but to will them into being something else. But the words on that paper were not suggestions. They were engineered facts, cold and precise, printed in a font that offered no room for interpretation. He would trace the letterhead with a trembling finger, as if the texture of the expensive paper might confess it was all a joke. But it wasn't. His eyes would catch on the phrases again, this time not as a narrative, but as a series of hammer blows. Patent holder Frank Miller. The name would seem foreign, an intruder in a story he had already written for himself. Quarterly payment. Not a one-time inheritance. An ongoing stream. A river of money he had just tried to dam with a locked gate. Then the number. $850,000. The figure would feel absurd, an impossible sum that made his own financial struggles seem like a child's game. And finally, the two words that would dismantle his entire world: suspended an authorization. And that would be the moment the gears in his salesman's brain, the ones that ran on charm and leverage and other people's money, would grind to a halt and then click violently into a new, terrifying alignment. The money wasn't in the house. It wasn't in some dusty stock portfolio left behind by Sarah. The money was being actively generated. It was coming from the mind, from the work, from the ongoing value of the man he had called useless, the man he had thrown out into the rain. The insult would come back to him, then his own words echoing in the sudden ringing silence of the kitchen. Useless old man. A bitter laugh might escape his lips, a raw, ragged sound. The man he thought was a liability was in fact the sole asset. The entire fortune he was planning to build his new life on was tied not to the property, but to the person he had so carelessly discarded. The realization would hit him not like a wave, but like a sudden, sickening drop in altitude. The air would rush out of his lungs. He'd need to sit down, his hand gripping the edge of the granite countertop to steady himself. He would look around the beautiful kitchen, the state-of-the-art appliances, the wide windows with their perfect view of the lake. Yesterday, this was his kingdom. Now it was just a set of expensive, inanimate objects, a stage for a play that had been canceled. The house wasn't a prize. It was a trap. A beautiful home he now had no income to support. He had locked himself in, not Frank out. Panic, hot and acidic, would rise in his throat. His first instinct, the only one he'd ever trusted, was to talk his way out of it, to regain control. He would snatch his phone from the counter, his fingers clumsy, almost dropping it. He'd stab at the screen, pulling up my old contact number. He would press call, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. And as he held the phone to his ear, he would be met not with my angry voice, not with a chance to negotiate, but with the flat, impersonal finality of a disconnected line. The 3 short beeps, the sound of a closed door. He would try again, jabbing the redial button with a desperate fury. Beep, beep, beep. The reality of his isolation would begin to sink in. He was in my house, but I was gone, and I had taken the entire world with me. A strangled cry of frustration would escape him. He'd pace the length of the kitchen, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up. He might shout my name, Frank. The sound swallowed by the quiet indifference of the house. He would be a cornered animal, realizing the walls were not only closing in, but that he had built them himself. He would look at his phone again, the sleek, expensive device that was supposed to be his connection to the world, his tool of power. But it was useless. The only number that mattered was one he could no longer reach, and in a final explosive act of powerlessness, he would hurl it. The phone would fly across the kitchen, a black rectangle against the soft beige of the wall. It would hit with a sharp, sickening crack, the sound of plastic and glass and delicate circuits surrendering to brute force. The screen would spiderweb with 1,000 fractures before going dark. It would clatter to the hardwood floor in a small, pathetic pile of shattered technology. Then there would be silence, a profound, ringing silence. And in that quiet, Kevin Holt, the man who thought he had won everything, would slide down the wall, his back against the cool plaster, and put his head in his hands, utterly and completely defeated. Not by me, not by a lawyer, but by the clean, simple, and devastating consequences of his own actions. I spent the next 2 days in the quiet hum of the hotel room, letting the world outside my window move without me. I wasn't hiding. I was waiting. An engineer knows that after you apply a specific stress to a system, you must wait and observe how it reacts. Kevin was a system I knew well, a structure built on the faulty foundation of other people's patience. I knew the cracks would begin to show. David called me on the first morning. His voice was as calm as ever. As predicted, we received a call from a Mr. Kevin Holt at 8:05 a.m. He was insistent. I could picture it perfectly. Kevin, after a sleepless night, would have turned to the one tool he always trusted: his voice. He would have called David's office, expecting his confident, important tone to part the waters and grant him an audience. David continued, my paralegal. Ms. Albright handled the call. She is exceptionally good at being a polite, unmovable wall. He didn't need to give me the transcript. I could write it myself. Kevin would have started with charm, then moved to thinly veiled threats about his close relationship with me, and finally ended with sputtering rage when Miss Albright informed him, in her serene and professional voice, that their office had been instructed not to discuss my affairs. She would have told him that all communication must be submitted in writing. Kevin's charm, his primary currency, had no value at that office. It was his first real encounter with a door that would not open just because he knocked. David's law firm was a fortress of procedure, and Kevin had just bounced off the main gate. His next move, just as predictable, would have been to find me. After failing with David, he would have jumped in his car and sped back to the residence suites, convinced he could confront me in person, that he could fix this with an argument or a performance of contrition. I imagined him striding into that beige lobby, his face a mask of urgent concern, only to be met with the same polite, impenetrable customer service smile he'd gotten the day before. I'm sorry, sir, the young woman at the desk would say, her eyes already focused on her computer screen. Mr. Miller checked out this morning. Checked out, he'd ask, his voice tight with disbelief. Where did he go? Did he leave a forwarding address? We have no further information, sir. She wouldn't be lying and she wouldn't care. To her, I was just a name on a receipt, a room that was now ready to be cleaned for the next guest. He would be standing there in that sterile lobby, the smell of stale coffee in the air, with the sudden disorienting realization that I was no longer a fixed target. I was moving, and he had no map. The financial pressure would be next. A man like Kevin, who lives on the edge of his means, feels a cash flow problem, like a physical illness. Rattled and angry, he would try to reassert his control, his status, by doing something normal and expensive. Maybe he'd take Lily to a high-end toy store, or try to book a reservation at that overpriced steakhouse Sarah used to love. He would hand over his credit card, the one linked to an account that was now a ghost, and he would hear the quiet, humiliating words, I'm sorry, sir, it's not going through. Do you have another form of payment? The small, public shame, the erosion of the image he had so carefully constructed. He had been living on a line of credit backed by my name and my quiet compliance. Now that I was no longer compliant, the numbers were coming due. It's a simple equation, one he had spent his entire adult life ignoring. The bills always arrive. His final desperation would be social. He would try to salvage his story with the neighbors. But by then, the mail carrier would have made his rounds. The certified letter from David's office, the formal notice of eviction, would be sitting in the mailbox of the house he claimed was his. He could no longer spin the tale of the happy voluntary retiree. The paper trail had already corrected the narrative. The neighbors would be polite, of course. They would listen with sympathetic nods from their doorways, but their eyes would be different. Their doors would close a little too quickly. The eviction notice was never meant to actually put him on the street. It was meant to do exactly this, to strip away his story, to corner him in his own lie. A man without his narrative is just a trespasser. And the neighborhood would now see him for what he was, a man living in a house that wasn't his on borrowed time that was rapidly running out. I let his calls go to voicemail for 3 days. It wasn't a game. It was a strategy. A man who is drowning will say anything to the person holding the rope. I needed him to be past the initial panic. I needed him to be sitting in the cold, clear reality of his situation before we spoke. On the 4th day, I moved from the hotel to a small, furnished apartment I had arranged for weeks ago. It was a clean, quiet space with a view of the city skyline, a place that had no memories attached. It was the perfect place to make a final stand. That evening, a call came from an unknown number. I knew it was him. I let it ring 4 times, a small assertion of control, then answered. I said nothing. Frank Kevin's voice was tight, a wire pulled taut. The confident bluster was gone, replaced by a strained, desperate energy. "It's Dad," I said quietly. "Or have you forgotten?" The anger flared instantly, a predictable reflex. "What did you do?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "My cards are being declined. The bank won't even talk to me." David Chen's office is a brick wall. "What the hell did you do?" I leaned back in the unfamiliar chair and looked out at the city lights, a million distant fires. "I secured my assets, Kevin. The ones you were planning on spending. I wasn't—" "We can fix this," he said, the anger already giving way to the salesman's pitch. He was shifting gears, trying to find a strategy that worked. "Look, I know you're angry. I get it. I screwed up, but we can walk this back. Just call the company. Tell them it was all a big misunderstanding. We can say your lawyer overreacted. I'll pay you back for whatever this little stunt cost you. We can make this right." He was bargaining, trying to turn this into a transaction, a negotiation where he could leverage some imagined goodwill to get what he wanted. He didn't understand. The time for negotiation was over. "This isn't a negotiation, Kevin," I said, my voice as calm and flat as the window pane in front of me. "This is a correction. This isn't about money you can pay back. It's about a debt of a different kind." "Then what do you want?" he asked, the desperation finally breaking through. "An apology." "Fine. I'm sorry." "Okay, I'm sorry I kicked you out. Now please, just make the call." "I don't need your apology, Kevin," I said. "It doesn't have any value. I need a change." The line went silent. I could hear his ragged breathing, the sound of a man running out of road. And then the final stage. The pleading. "Please, Frank," he whispered, his voice breaking. He hadn't called me Frank since he was a teenager, trying to sound older than he was. "I'm begging you. I need that money. I'm in serious trouble. I'll lose everything. The house. Everything. Lily. She'll have nothing." He used his daughter's name as a shield, the last refuge of a man who has run out of his own justifications. It was a low blow, and he knew it. But I was prepared for it. "Lily will be taken care of," I said. "That was never in question. She is the only part of this that is not your fault." I stood up and walked to the window, needing to see the vast, indifferent city as I delivered the terms. "But you, Kevin, you have a choice to make. You say you're sorry. I'm going to give you a chance to prove it. Here are my conditions. They are not negotiable." I let the silence stretch, forcing him to listen. First, I began, "You will write a letter, by hand. You will write it to me, to Lily, and to the memory of your late wife. In it, you will detail exactly what you did and why you did it. You will not make excuses. You will not blame the market. You will not blame your ambition. You will apologize not for getting caught, but for the choices you made. David Chen will notarize it. Second, you will get a job, a real one. A job with a paycheck and a supervisor and a start time. I don't care if it's stocking shelves at a grocery store or selling cars at a used lot. You will support yourself and your daughter with your own 2 hands, and you will provide David with copies of your pay stubs every 2 weeks. And third, I said, delivering the final crucial term. The patent and all the royalties it generates will be placed into an irrevocable trust. The sole beneficiary will be Lily. It will be for her education, for her first home, for her future. You will not be a trustee. You will have no access to the funds ever. Her future will be permanently and legally protected from your mistakes." He was speechless. I could hear nothing on the other end but the faint static of a connection being held open by disbelief. He had expected a price, a number he could pay, a deal he could make. I had given him a new life, one he had to build himself from the ground up. You're taking everything," he finally stammered. "No, Kevin," I said. "I'm taking everything away from you. I'm giving it to your daughter. There is a difference." He was about to argue, to rage, to plead again. I could feel it building. So I delivered the final blow, the one that would leave no room for negotiation. "You wanted me to disappear, Kevin. Now you have a choice. You can accept these terms and begin the work of becoming a father your daughter can respect. Or I can disappear for good." What does that mean? "It means I have a meeting scheduled with the Board of Innovent Technologies next Friday. It's a standard annual review of my licensing agreement. If I am not there in person to confirm my continued and stable involvement, they have the right under that same Section 7C to reassign the patent license to a corporate partner to ensure its stability. The money, Kevin, all of it, will be gone. Forever. The river will simply dry up. You have 1 week to deliver that signed, notarized letter to David's office. The clock is ticking." I didn't wait for his response. I ended the call. I stood at the window for a long time, watching the endless stream of headlights below. Each one was a life, a story, a set of choices. For the first time in a decade, I felt like I was finally in control of mine. The game wasn't over, but I had just checkmated the king. The letter arrived at David's office on the 5th day, just as the deadline loomed. David called me not to read it, but simply to state that it had been received, signed, and notarized. I didn't need to see it to know how it was written. I could picture the scene in my head with the stark clarity of a memory. I imagined Kevin alone in the sprawling, silent house. The beautiful furniture would no longer look like a prize, but like a collection of ghosts. The silence would be immense, no longer a sign of peace, but of his own profound isolation. He would be sitting at the heavy oak dining table, a single sheet of expensive stationery in front of him, a pen feeling heavy and foreign in his hand. He wouldn't have written it in one go. He would have started and stopped a dozen times, the words of a true apology catching in his throat. The salesman in him would have tried to negotiate, to soften the language, to frame his actions as a misunderstanding. But the terms I had set were absolute. There was no room for spin. And then his eyes would have drifted to the mantelpiece, to the silver-framed photo of Lily, her school picture from the 2nd grade. A bright, innocent smile, a missing front tooth. He would look at his daughter's face and see not an asset to be protected, but a life he was responsible for. And in that moment, he would have finally understood. This wasn't about winning or losing against me. It was about what kind of father he was going to be for her. The pride, the arrogance, all of it would have finally collapsed under the simple, unbearable weight of that question. And he would have picked up the pen and written the truth, not for me, but for her. The next steps would be a series of small, private humiliations. The montage played in my mind. Kevin sitting in front of a laptop late at night, the blue light illuminating a face stripped of its usual confidence. His fingers would be flying across the keyboard, not crafting deals but filling out online job applications. I could see the titles on the screen: entry-level sales associate, customer service representative, warehouse logistics coordinator. Jobs that required humility, not a Rolodex. Jobs with a starting salary that wouldn't cover a single month's mortgage on the house he was sitting in. Then would come the emails, a steady stream of polite rejections. Thank you for your interest, but we have decided to move forward with other candidates. The world is not kind to men in their 40s starting over. Each email would be a small, fresh reminder of how far he had fallen. It was not a punishment I took pleasure in imagining. It was the necessary grinding friction of reality against ego. The letter was the first step. This was the second. It was not my victory. It was the beginning of his long walk back to solid ground. 3 months later, the world looked different. I was in my new apartment, a small, bright space on the 7th floor of a building that overlooked the city. It wasn't a grand house with a lawn that demanded constant attention. It was a place of quiet efficiency, a place where the view was of the sprawling, indifferent skyline, and I found a strange comfort in that. The walls were mine, the silence was mine, and the future was a clean, unwritten page. The laptop screen in front of me was bright. On the other end of the video call, Lily's face was framed by the familiar curtains of her bedroom. She was laughing, her missing tooth a perfect little gap in her smile. "Grandpa, that looks so cool," she said, her voice tinny through the speakers. "Can you make it fly?" I held up the small, intricate device I'd been tinkering with, a miniature drone powered by a new type of micro-engine I had designed in my spare time. It was a project born not of necessity, but of joy. "Not yet," I said, smiling. "But I'm working on the lift-to-weight ratio. It's a delicate balance." She didn't understand the technical terms, but she understood the light in my eyes. She understood that her grandfather was building things again. A soft knock came at my apartment door. "I have to go, sweetie," I said. "Talk to you tomorrow." "Okay, Grandpa, love. You love you too," I said, and ended the call. It was Maria holding a pie tin wrapped in a checkered cloth. The smell of cinnamon and baked apples filled my small entryway. "I made too much," she said, which was her standard gracious lie. "And I know you don't bake for yourself." "You know me too well, Maria," I said, taking the pie from her. We sat on my small balcony, the city spread out before us. We didn't talk about Kevin or the house. We talked about her garden, about the terrible new show on television, about Lily's progress in school. It was the easy, comfortable conversation of friends who had earned their peace. This quiet moment, this simple offering of a homemade pie, felt more valuable than all the hollow celebrations in my old life. After she left, I sat at my laptop, the scent of cinnamon still in the air. A new email was in my inbox. The subject line was simple, final documents. It was from David. I clicked it open. There were 2 attachments. The first was a scanned PDF of a handwritten letter, the ink a deep formal blue. Kevin's apology notarized and stamped. The second was a copy of an employment contract. Kevin Holt Jr. Marketing Associate, salary and benefits clearly listed. He had met the terms. I didn't read the apology letter word for word. I didn't need to. Seeing the file itself was enough. It was the final brick in the wall I had built, the final undeniable proof that the correction was complete. I dragged the email into a folder I had labeled simply "Closed." Then I closed the laptop. I stood and walked to the large window looking out at the vast horizon. The sun was beginning to set, painting the undersides of the clouds in shades of orange and pink. I had reclaimed my dignity. I had protected my granddaughter's future. I had given my son-in-law the hardest and most necessary lesson of his life. The battle hadn't been won with a shout, but with a signature. It was never a story of revenge. It was the quiet, methodical work of restoration. I had lost a house, but I had reclaimed my life. And in the end, that was the only asset that truly mattered. When kindness is mistaken for weakness and entitlement for inheritance, true strength isn't found in anger, but in calm, strategic action. Reclaiming your dignity and peace by methodically enforcing boundaries teaches the most profound lesson: respect is earned and consequences are the debt that entitlement always pays.